Welcome to Classic 4x4, the podcast for and by classic four-wheel drive enthusiasts. I'm your host, Chris Piccone, and you can follow the podcast on Instagram and Facebook at classic4x4_trucks. Also, make sure you subscribe to the show on your podcast listening platform and check out our website at classic4x4.com. And make sure to reach out to us if we can help you sell your classic, custom, and modified truck or 4x4. Hello, Classic 4x4 listeners. I'm your host, Chris Piccone, and we are getting into the end of Season 3 with Episode 11. And today we are joined by the man, the myth, and the legend, and actually the first guest ever on the Classic 4x4 podcast in our first season with our first episode, Charlie Pitcher. What's going on, Charlie?
Hey, thanks for having me, Chris. It's great to be back.
Dude, I appreciate you coming on the podcast today. And you have an insane story about rescuing like a rare pre-war Dodge from like the wilderness in California. And that's what I wanted to have you on today to talk about. And I'm super excited to talk about that.
Well, the story is pretty fresh, and I'm excited to tell you all the details about it because I couldn't have done it with just on my own power. It took a lot of friends helping me and a lot of negotiations with landowners.
That's cool, man. So we'll get into that. But for all you out there that aren't familiar with Charlie, his company is New Era Performance. And I was actually in our pre-interview joking with Charlie. Then when I'm like, hey, when I'm having conversations with people and I'm like, hey, you know Charlie from New Era? People are like, nah, not familiar with him. I'm like, you know the Dodge guy, Metal by Charlie? And people are like, oh yeah, that guy. I know that guy. So if you don't follow him on social media, make sure you do. It's at Metal by Charlie. Check out his website, metalbycharlie.com, and also subscribe to his YouTube channel, which is, you guessed it, Metal by Charlie, right?
Yep.
Because he's going to be putting together a YouTube series on the rescue where he preserves the past for the future with this rare Dodge and the entire story. And he's going to be putting that up on YouTube. But before we go any further, I got to give credit where credit is due. As everyone knows, Season 3 was all listener requested episodes. And the listener that requested this particular episode is a gentleman by the name of Nate Anderson out of Arvada, Colorado. You can follow him on all the social channels at, this is an interesting social media handle, which is Nat Ander 2K sometime. So it's NATANDER. The number 2K sometime. You know what? Just search Nate Anderson on Instagram, and I think you'll find him that way. But Nate's got some pretty cool trucks. He's got a 76 Dodge W100 on one tons that I just saw. One tons. That I just saw he put a FiTech EFI in, got a 91 Jeep Comanche, and he's definitely an 80s or 90s kid with this one. He's got a 97 Honda Prelude. So Nate, thank you for requesting Charlie for this particular episode. It was kind of funny. Once you started posting that you were rescuing this thing and all like those crazy videos out in California, I started getting DMs and messages that were like, yo, you need to do an episode about this. And I was like, well, all right, I'll look up Charlie. But Charlie, let's talk about what have you been up to since it's been a little over a year. You were the first guest I ever had on the first episode of the first season of Classic 4x4 podcast. I'm forever indebted to you for that. And you believed in me. You and the first, I'd say 6 or 8 guests I had on believed in me before this was a top 25 automotive podcast, top 15% podcast, in general out of 4 million, plus podcasts. You believed in me. I can't thank you enough. And I'm so happy to have you back on the show. But in the past 15 months, what have you been up to? What's going on in the garage? What projects you working on?
Well, the stress levels are definitely getting higher as the builds get more intense. But we're doing really well over here. I'm still in the same location in southeastern PA, and we're really pushing on the custom chassis work. We had a couple YouTube installs over the past year with just doing our 3-link coilover suspension. So that has evolved into doing full restorations with this chassis that we've been working on. And then we're still doing all the mechanicals, all the paint, the interior work that we were doing in the past with that new chassis. So I currently have a 93 Dodge, and it started out as an extended cab long bed 2-wheel drive dually, and the customer wanted a short bed 4-wheel drive service truck. So
everything it wasn't.
Yeah. Basically, we bought it for some clean sheet metal and a title, and it evolved into chopping the frame in half and shortening it, and doing the full resto. So it was completely different.
What you're telling me is a extended cab long bed dually now identifies as a short bed.
Yeah, so it has the same wheelbase as a regular cab long bed, basically, but it's an extended cab.
That's cool.
The neat concept of that is Dodge never built an extended cab short bed first gen diesel truck. So you could get it as a gas engine, but you couldn't get it as a diesel. So this truck, I mean, once you see a photo of it, it's nothing like you've ever seen before. And then on top of that, it has an aluminum utility body on the back of it. The guy does tree work and landscaping, and he wants to have a durable diesel 4-wheel drive truck. So here we are, and the truck is running and driving, nearly complete. The service body's in the paint booth right now to get sprayed this weekend. And we went through the engine, upgraded the trans, the 3-links on it. And I think it's going to be a really sweet truck when it's done. So that's been one of the bigger focuses as of the last couple of months. Besides that, I just got a truck back from paint that we fully metal worked. It's a 65 D100 pickup. And that was refinished in the original desert turquoise color.
Love that color, man.
Yeah,
that's so
it's
cool.
great.
So cool.
So, and then one of the bigger projects, two of the bigger projects besides those is we have a 47 Dodge dump truck that's slowly evolving. That was a huge snowball project, and it went from doing the restoration to realizing we had to actually recreate it. So the frame was completely disassembled. Like every hot rivet that was holding it together had to be removed and just completely reconstructed. And that took some serious manpower. So that one's moving along. I'm in the middle of drawing on the computer. I have a new dump body we're drawing for it. The guy wanted an exact replica of the original dump body for it. And then we have a 1953 Power Wagon we're doing for a client in Georgia. And that is a full custom scratch built chassis, Cummins 4-cylinder, common rail engine, the 3-link, all the good stuff with like a roll cage built in, leather interior, like all the things you could check off on an old Power Wagon without getting it like too modernized. So very exciting stuff.
Those Power Wagons are doing some dollars right now. So hey, when that guy's done with it and he's ready to get rid of it, please send him my way. I will handle all the advisory and marketing and execute the sale of that truck. I'd love to bring that thing.
So the best part about that build, as much as it's making me pull my hair out, having to invent every piece of it, I have 4 bodies here to do more. And I have 4 powertrains, and all I have to do is basically click an email to get a chassis cut. So, I mean, we're like right there. It's almost like in full swing. We could have production of these trucks.
That's super cool, man. I mean, you're known as literally, the go-to epic, iconic classic Dodge builder out there. But like what a lot of people don't realize, and I want to talk about, is your level of skill when it comes to fabrication. Like that is like a whole different world. There are a lot of guys that can build stuff, right? And build cool stuff and buy products, aftermarket products that are out there. But in the Dodge world, there aren't a ton of aftermarket products. So you have to fabricate, you and your team have to fabricate, not only design, but fabricate all the stuff that you need, like, which is wild. It's not like a Jeep CJ where, dude, you could build a Jeep CJ from the ground up off of Amazon these days. The parts are so plentiful. Like these Dodges, the parts aren't plentiful. They're not there. There isn't a lot of new old stock. And you're fabricating these things. And fortunately, you'll design them, you'll fabricate them, and you'll also help other builders and sell them. So what are you working on in the shop from the fabrication side that you have available for the public to purchase to help out with their builds?
So we're still swinging pretty hard on everything on the website. Has been a great seller. We've done probably 60 sets of crew cab floor pans now. which in my eyes is insane because that started out as like it took me 6 months to find 6 people that wanted them. And now it's like a set a week.
Yeah, that's awesome.
We're hand making full floor pans for these crew cabs. So that's pretty wild. And then we're still doing a lot of the powertrain conversion brackets, and those have continued to evolve. And that whole thing is like, I'm pretty detail oriented. And then I have the one guy that works for me. He's also very critical of like how things are put together and how we can improve. So the two of us are constantly like tweaking our drawings and changing stuff and double checking how things fit. And in reality, it's like the price hasn't gone up much on the parts, but some of those parts that have had 14 or 15 versions now. And you might look at version 5 and version 15 and not see a difference, but we know it's there. And it's either to help us on the assembly side of things or help you on the install. So we've been doing a lot of like 5-speed conversion brackets. We're still doing a ton of like just simple things like fuel tank straps and door reinforcements and the common things that these trucks kind of fail, common failure points. And then the big thing we're going to release here is the 3-link setup. And that's a whole bolt-on coilover front suspension for a 1-ton Dodge Ram pickup, like 72 to 93 era. The only welding you have to do on it is the axle brackets. So it's pretty friendly for a 3-link install compared to some of the other companies I've seen offering such a setup, to the point where like you'll see an install video of another shop and they'll be having you use like angle finders and like string lines and all this stuff to just mount a coilover shock. I'm like, dude, that's done. Like, you just use the holes in the frame and mount ours. You don't have to sit there and reinvent it. So it kind of takes out a lot of error. And on top of that, it handles and rides amazing. I mean, it's like one of the first setups I've ever had where you could go down the road in a 1-ton truck without sway bars, hit anything you want, take any turn, and you feel like you're in control.
That's awesome, man. And dude, that's what you're known for is that 3-link coil setup, that conversion. So that's awesome that you're bringing that to market. And all this stuff.
Yeah, that's like year 4. Like I was looking at like past photos, and Frank's truck got like a hand cut one. That was like my V1. I'm going to try this out. And that's evolved, 10 times since then. But it was 4 years ago this month that I even started on this whole venture.
Dude,
and
it's
wild,
man. Completely wild. And all that stuff, the floor plans, the fuel straps, and eventually that coil conversion kit, all that stuff can be found on your website and purchased on your website, metalbycharlie.com, right?
Yep.
Awesome, dude. That's awesome. So you heard it out here, that coil conversion kit is going to finally be available. So what Charlie is known for, he's going to, you don't have to send your truck to southeastern Pennsylvania anymore. You can buy the kit and install it at home these days. So that's awesome.
Yeah, we're working on a couple guys that are specialized in installing these things. So that way it's not all through my shop. Cool. Because there's still some things you got to ask about or know. And it's one of those liability things where you don't want to just throw someone the parts and hope to figure it out. So you got to have some sort of interface between the installer and me to, make sure everything's safe and installed right. So
that's cool. I completely forgot that you're in southeastern Pennsylvania. I knew you were in PA, but I forgot you were in southeastern PA. You're in Westchester, right? Westchester County?
Close to that.
Gotcha.
So my shop's about 10 minutes north of Newark, Delaware.
Cool. I'm
like right off 95.
I was just out there this past Wednesday. I picked up for my own personal collection. I picked up a Scout 2, a 73 Scout 2, which for all of our listeners out there, that's a rare one because it's a 1-year only grill on the Scout. And I ended up this thing was in Idaho its entire life. A guy in Pennsylvania picked it up like 4 years ago with big intentions, never did anything of it, just let it sit. And as well as I do, when you let these things sit, they don't get better, they get worse. But he let it sit in a dry, climate-controlled garage, thank God. So the body is immaculate. It's perfect. It's got this like crazy 80s paint job on it. And I'm going to do like an OG patina build where I sent it to my friends out at Mount Zion Off-Road in York, Pennsylvania. And that's why I was out there. I was just out there Wednesday. We were speccing out the whole build. And we're basically gutting this thing. Every mechanical component, every system is getting gutted. We're keeping the frame, the interior, the body, and everything else is going to be almost like a drivability conversion. So we're about to embark on that. But I took that from me in coastal New Jersey. It was like 3 hours out there each way. I drove 3 hours there, was there for about 2 hours, drove 3 hours back. But
well, next time you're in an area, swing through.
I definitely will, man.
And you've bought a couple Western vehicles now. What's your take on the dust that comes out of those things as you take them apart?
Oh man, like dude, I got to tell you. So I have a J10, an 82 J10, which actually I have on the market right now. But this thing came from, it was a Montana to Texas to Arkansas, right? Truck.
Oh, all the dust.
I spent I sent, first thing I sent it to, after it was done with all the mechanical refurbishment, I sent it out to my detailer, and he was like, dude, we spent hours on this thing, like interior, undercarriage, like blowing out the frame. He's like, and I don't think I did a dent on it. He goes, you're going to have to figure this out yourself. Like, and I probably spent myself in my own shop, I'd say 2 or 3 days just trying it. They're dry. Don't get me wrong. What's great about dry climates is everything's dry. There's no rust. The rubber is all dry rotted too, right? Right. So like every soft line of this thing had to be replaced, but like there was dust in every orifice, and there still is, and it will live forever. So it's insane. What about you? Like you get these things like rat's nests and all kinds of stuff.
Oh yeah. The thing is like if you don't clean it out when you bring it east, you want to talk about a quick rusting vehicle. That's how you get it, because they'll be so packed full of dirt and nests and just anything that like is out there. If you don't clean it out and spend like a whole day, that thing will rust from the inside out faster than you can imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, you could sit there and spend hours cleaning out one rocker panel, but if you don't do it, you might as well just buy an East Coast vehicle because it will actually rust faster, I think.
Yeah, that's wild, man. Yeah.
One of my favorite,
insane.
one of my favorite things to do on a Western vehicle, it's like super childish, but if you have like a vehicle sitting out in the desert sun and the hood's off of it, you have those like clear washer and coolant tanks. They're made of plastic, like white plastic. Just don't even think about it. Just take your fist and just punch it. And the thing will just turn to dust. Like just 1,000 pieces just explode in your face. And like, it won't even hurt because it's just so brittle. You'll just punch it. It'll just disappear.
Dude, even if the hood is on it, it'll still like,
more likely.
I learned with this J10, man, like almost all my stuff comes from, out West. And I learned with this J10, man, it's great. The body is immaculate. It's clean. It's rust free. But all the soft lines, anything that's rubber on this thing was fuel. It had the original fuel lines, coolant lines, stuff like that. And just, oh man, I finally ended up giving up and just saying all new fuel system, all new soft lines, all new cooling system, all new plumbing, anything that was rubber on this thing got replaced. You just had to, because every time I was driving it around, like something would pop. My wife would be like, it smells like gas in here. You're like, oh man, you look under it. There's a soft fuel line just pulsating with the mechanical fuel pumps, like a heartbeat. You're like, oh man, dude. So that's a story for another time, because we were about 10 miles out on a beach when that happened. Right.
Oh boy.
And that is why I carry black Gorilla duct tape everywhere I go. Right there.
Yep.
And zip ties. So, but enough about that. Let's get into this insane adventure you went on to rescue this pre-war Dodge out in like the mountains in rural California. So before we even get into like the wild story, what is this truck? What is this truck actually?
So before the war, 1938, 1939, Dodge was really trying to get into the heavier truck hauling industry. Mm-hmm. And they didn't have an engine that could really pull weight and get good economy. So they started designing an engine, a diesel engine. It was based off of their bigger flathead 6. So they started with a 331 cubic inch flathead block, and they made their own cylinder head for it. And they made their own pistons to make a Lenova style engine, which is similar to like a Buda diesel. Mm-hmm. And it was fully mechanical. It had a rotary injection pump, just like you'd find on like an early 12 valve Cummins, very similar design. But it was an overhead valve. It has a really unique looking piston. And the whole concept was we need something that can have a higher torque rating, get better fuel economy so you can have longer range. And so this engine went into development, and they installed it in like 4 or 5 different models of trucks between 1939 and 1941. And from what I've figured out, thanks to a historian in Michigan who also has one, they made about 200 of these trucks a year. So it's pretty slim to begin with. And then if you think about the war efforts that started around the early 40s with the U.S. involvement, by the time the war was over, the technology had jumped so much in that 4 years that the war was over, everybody came home, and next thing you know, we had Detroit diesels powering the highway, not this like flathead 6-base diesel with 140 horsepower. So the truck was instantly obsolete. And at that point, I think everybody just scrapped them out because they were pretty much worthless. So there's currently, I just found out some more that exist last night. There's currently like 2 or 3 in Australia, which I thought was kind of different. And then there's 139 in a museum in Tennessee, and there's 141 in Michigan. And then mine is also in 1941. So
what is it? It's a 1941, I guess. What is the number moniker that comes along with it? The model moniker.
I'm drawing a blank here. 1941 Dodge 3-ton truck. And it was a WD. There's an A in there for auxiliary. I'm drawing a blank.
No worries. It's like, I mean, you can't even remember all these, because Dodge, their model designations, they would have especially as you got into war, where you get like the war era where they were a big producer of 4x4s and trucks. Like they would have, designations that were like WD, but then this series would be, and this configuration was like 23 to 28. And then you go we have the WC, which would, in this particular configuration would be 7 to 9. But then another configuration would be 10 to 14. Yeah. It's so wild back then. So, but what I just remembered it's a WKDA. So the K was the 3-ton model. So WKDA, and then there was a suffix number which told you the wheelbase, and I haven't measured it yet, but it's a pickup cab on this big truck chassis with 10 whole bud wheels. And the two interesting parts of it is the hood is longer and the fenders are wider to fit the engine and carry the wheelbase this thing is. But essentially, it's still a pickup cab. That's cool. So it's a 41 Dodge WKDA 3-ton, right? Yep, but this thing is rare. They had made about 200 of them a year, which, I mean, that alone, if they made 200 of them, they were utility built. That means that, gone. Nobody ever saved these things. They were discarded. But what's amazing that you said there's 2 in Australia. So, and this is when I started the Classic 4x4 podcast. I see all my demographics, my geographics, all my analytics, and we have a huge listener base in Australia, believe it or not.
There's a lot of car lovers down there.
They love their trucks and they love their classic trucks. And there were a lot of, especially AMC era Jeeps that just ended up in Australia, right? Yep. Like the CJ8 Overlander, stuff like that. And there's a lot of people that have, that love, and a lot of enthusiasts in Australia. So shout out to all of our Australian listeners out there. All right. So now we know what this truck is, why it's rare. Where did this lead come from before you even put together the team, right? To go out to the wilderness, the remote wilderness of California. Where did this lead come from that somebody found this thing in the remote wilderness of California in the first place?
Yeah. So there was a hiking trail near the truck, that went across private and public land, but it was a kind of a frequent place for visitors of the area to hike through. And I guess the way it surfaced was there was a post on a forum, if any of you remember what a forum is nowadays. So a guy posted on a forum a photo of the truck with GPS coordinates. This was probably 5 years ago, and said, "Hey, look what I found." And the experts were like, "Oh, that's a 3-ton, and someone was like, "It looks like it has a diesel valve cover on it." And so that post was picked up by a guy I've been following for years on Instagram, who's also a car truck enthusiast. His name is Don Scott Wheels is his username. Mm-hmm. He gave me the info. Said, "Hey, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get out there and get this thing. It seems like it's more up your alley, being young and full of energy and a little bit willing to take a risk and get kind of dangerous and whatever." He's like, "Go figure this out." So I immediately jumped on it and did a land search and figured out who owned the property, called the guy, and he really didn't know much about it and didn't really seem to care too much about it. So I just threw him a number and I was like, "Hey, if you can get this truck off the mountain, I'll give you this much for it." He's like, "Okay, I'll see what I can do." Well, nothing ever came out of that. And time continued to move on. And I started getting a little bit more impatient, and I wanted to get it saved and out of there before something happened to it. And like, for instance, a year and a half ago, there was a fire on the next mountain over in California. So I was like, this truck is limited on its time out there. It needs to be saved. So the biggest problem was there was an easement battle to get to it. There's two landowners fighting over whether or not the easement existed, if you're allowed to drive up there. And that's kind of where everything fell apart. So I spent the majority of the past year and a half trying to talk to the guy that we had to walk across his property and, pull this truck out. And he didn't want any damage done to this property with bulldozers or tow trucks, any of that. So we basically had to limit it down to hand tools. And there was, I was out there last year and I tried really hard to get it. And the guy was basically like, hey, this is the only time you can come get it, but you can't come get it because I don't want you up there. So I said, well, I know you don't want it to come out this year, but I promise you that I'm going to call you again this time next year. Like, I will call you and try to make this happen. So the longer you wait, the harder it's going to get. So like, just help me out here. We'll get in there. We'll get the truck. We'll get out. You'll never see me again, kind of thing. And so at this point, I had gotten some sort of agreement formed up. This was a month ago. I finally got an agreement formed up. I got the guy to sign the paperwork to let us go up there. Okay. And this is just my own paperwork I drew up that said, here's our plan.
But this is just to go up there, not really to take it out.
We had got to the point where we negotiated that we couldn't use bulldozers or heavy equipment, and we were limited to hand tools and like a light utility vehicle, such as a mule or an ATV. Okay. And that's what we were allowed to do. He didn't want.
Before we even go further, and you don't have to give us exactly where this is, like, where roughly is this and how remote is it?
So there's the town of Riverside, California.
Okay.
And we were in the mountains adjacent to it. So there's a little town called Silverado, California. And this truck was on a mountain that looked down over Silverado. Gotcha. And Silverado is a really tiny little town. It's not really huge on the map, but it's definitely a small kind of tourist place. I really liked my stay there. So we stayed, the next town over in a hotel, but there was a couple little restaurants and a cafe down there. And it was a nice place to be. It was quiet. But that's where the truck resided.
So how deep was it into this wilderness, right? So where was the closest entry point, or where was the trailhead or whatever, where you had, your equipment, your trailer, and what was the trek, and how far from that point all the way to where the actual truck was that needed to be rescued?
So from where there are 2 lanes, so we parked our trailer down in a gravel lot at the base of the mountain on a 2-lane road. And from there, we had to go up a 1-lane, kind of concreted, but mostly gravel lane. And that kind of winded up through like this village of all these people's houses. It had a couple pretty tight switchbacks. Like, we couldn't even do it with a pickup truck. We had to like do a 2-point turn, and we got it to the top of that. And that's the guy's house that we had to do all the negotiations with. So we parked there, we dropped our equipment off, our tools, our 4-wheeler and all that. But we could not get a trailer up there. There was no way we could get a trailer up there. It was just us and the truck. And from that point, so from the point of the trailer to where the top of the drive ended, that was probably about a 300-foot climb over maybe a 0.3 of a mile. It wasn't too bad. Okay. There was definitely some steep parts to it. But from that point on, it was all a trail. And that was another 500 to 600-foot climb over the course of like a half a mile.
All single track, all dirt single track.
Oh, it wasn't even single track. It used to be a driveway that the guy bulldozed to get up to his property, but it had eroded over the past 20 years to where the trail was only 4 feet wide. The truck's like, 89 inches or something insane. It's huge for width. And at that point, I did like a time-lapse video doing the hike for the YouTube video we're going to do on it. And there's points in that trail where you're walking forward, and if you stand there and look 10 feet in front of you, what you need to walk on is already 3 feet higher. It's steep. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking, okay, we got a truck with no brakes. Like, how are we going to do this? So like, we're winding up the top of this mountain on this, basically an ATV trail, walking it. and there's all sorts of, brush and trees and like things we got to navigate around. It's almost like a video game with levels, I'd say, for how the terrain is. Like there's this one spot where there's a bunch of
Donkey Kong, where you're going like through the switchbacks and you're jumping over stuff and you're swinging. Like what's crazy about this is like, and to kind of put this into perspective, is mileage wise, it's roughly less than 2 miles, right? But the elevation climb is what's insane. Like there's about, correct me if I'm wrong, if I did this math right, there's about 1,000 foot elevation difference
between the trailer and the truck. Yeah.
Which is like, it's bonkers. Like that's like, yes, it's not far, but the elevation climb is what is the hardest part.
And if you're a seasoned hiker on foot, you're like, okay, I've got that. We can do that. But then like, if you factor a vehicle into it, it just doesn't work out in your favor. Usually there's not enough control of the situation to take a vehicle out of amongst those kinds of circumstances. So, the thing that really kind of was a letdown, the trail we were told about wasn't actually the trail to get up there. Well, like half of it was, but the other half we were misled on. So the initial drop point was maybe 100 feet down from where we actually pulled it out. Mm-hmm. And so we're like, we get all of our stuff up there. We're walking up it. And we're like, dude, I don't know about this. Like we just drove 7 hours out here. And I'm looking up this eroded wash, and it's not even 4 feet wide. And I'm like on my all fours trying to climb up this thing. I'm like, I can't take a 10-ton truck down this thing. Like, and like all my 3 buddies that are with me, and I'm at the point now where I'm like, I've already feel like I've done it. Like, I don't know, Charlie, you've gone a little far. Like you've got your friends roped in this now. Like, do you just keep like going along with it, or do you like say like, hey man, like I'm sorry, like here we are, but like it's not gonna work out? And like, I always kind of get in these situations where I kind of look at my buddies, I'm like, man, I wrote them in another one. Here we go. Like,
there's no going back now. But who's the team though? Like, because it obviously takes an army to do this type of work. Like, who was the team that you enlisted for this?
So I brought 2 people with me on this trip out west. I brought my good friend Jake, and then my one employee and friend Matt. Mm-hmm. And then we've been staying at our friend Cord Higbee's house out in Nevada. And his username is Dick's Diesel Garage. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like our home base for all of our fun operations and just mechanical chaos, I'd call it. So he was all about going to get the truck. So he helped us get, we got his truck ready, his trailer ready. We got all the gear ready. And like, we're going 7 hours. So there's a lot of planning that has to be involved in like just making sure you think you have everything you might need for a truck you've never set eyes on in a place you've never been. Like, do you think you need 150 feet of 3/4 inch cable? I don't know, but like maybe we should bring it in case we got to belay the thing down, So it's like you're just spitballing, like trying to figure out what you need. The 2 important things we brought were the ATV, a 4-wheel drive ATV, and this little like Harbor Freight flatboard cart that was like 4 foot by 4 foot, like this tiny rinky dink little cart. Those 2 things saved the whole trip.
It's amazing. You bring all this heavy, heavy, I don't want to say equipment,
batteries,
but like all this stuff, and an ATV and a Harbor Freight, like assemble yourself trailer is what saves the day, right? It always happens
professional,
yes. So you're at the top of this thing and you realize that you've gotten to the top, you've climbed this 1,000 feet of elevation, and you realize where you thought this truck was is not where it's at. So where is it? Is it higher? Is it lower? Like, how did you get to it?
So the deal was like, he showed us the way of the trail, mm-hmm. and we knew where the truck was, but the problem was like the trail condition was so poor that we were getting very, very like disappointed in the whole process, because we're like, there's no way this truck's going to come down this trail. This is too dangerous. And if we lose control of it, it's going to go straight down this hill right into the village we had to drive to get up here. And I'm like, I don't have like the money and I don't have that to pay. Like, I don't want to get involved in that kind of a lawsuit. Like, that's just too much for an old truck. So we're like, man, like, this is a little over our heads. Like, I don't think we're going to be able to do this on foot with wheels and tires and rolling and, manpower. We're going to have to like call in the big boys on this, because we get up there and like, here's the truck. And we're like, all right, let's look around and see if there's a plan B. And we scattered and walked every direction off that mountain. And no matter which way we went, we'd be like, oh, the trail's good. We could probably roll down this way. And then you get to this point where you get a little bit of brush and you take an extra step and it's like a 200-foot drop. And you're like, oh, all right, well, I guess this isn't going to work. And so I actually ended up calling Frank of all people and I told him the scenario. I was like, what do you think I should do? Like, I got two options here. I can either
like Frank,
take
my cousin.
chance. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like,
so you call.
I called him. I wanted like some other input because I was sitting here.
You call a celebrity chef. You're in between a rock and a hard place, and you call a celebrity chef in, right?
Yeah. Well, here's all right. So this is like another avenue of this whole trip. Before I actually got out there, I was talking to Frank about this, and then he called his good friend. What's his name? The one guy that's on a lot of TV shows. Matty Matheson.
So I met Matty Matheson at Frank and Julia's wedding, dude. Yeah. And for all of our listeners, Matty Matheson is an amazing chef out of, I think, Toronto. That's where he's originally from. But he, if you watch the show The Bear, he's in the show The Bear. Right.
Okay.
So he's a celebrity chef, but he's also on top of it an actor now, and he is like tatted from head to toe, and he is the sweetest person I've ever met in my entire life. And
That's what I've heard.
So you call my cousin, right?
So I'm just like working.
He put you in touch with Matty Matheson of all people. So now you're just like running down the list of celebrity chefs here.
Yeah, I'm just like trying to like pull together some kind of network, and maybe someone pops out of the woodwork and has like a little help to this like situation. So Matty calls this other guy in Southern California who's he's in the military, and like he gives me his number, and this guy, like, I call him, I don't know who I'm talking to, right? I'm like, what does this guy specialize in? Does he specialize in like heavy lifting or like bending the law? Because I kind of need both. And he's like, hey, he's kind of both. I'm like, all right, whatever. So that guy actually put boots on the ground and walked up there and took photos and videos of the whole truck a week before we got out there. Mm-hmm. And walked the trail. He talked to the landowners, and I think he helped a lot because I think beforehand it was just like an internet phone call based kind of conversation, and the person that had the easement didn't really know who they're talking to and was very kind of like withheld and didn't want to get involved in it. Mm-hmm. Too dangerous. And I think this guy going up there and meeting him in person really kind of helped smooth things over and calm their nerves a little bit as far as like how the operation could go. So that helped a lot. But nonetheless, so we're on the mountain. I'm calling Frank. I'm like, dude, I got two options. Like, I could try to piece this thing out. There's a lot of liability, lawsuit. You know, I don't have millions of dollars to deal with the low buck old 40s Dodge truck. That's just kind of cool to me. So I'm like, what do I do? I was like, there's also this option of an airlift. He's like, well, what's that cost? I'm like, well, like, depends. Like, I can't afford the Black Hawk because they told me the Black Hawk to lift something is like, it's the only way I could lift 10,000 pounds. And they're telling me it's like 80 grand. I'm like, no, there's no way. It's not worth it. So I'm like, what other options do we have? I'm like, well, we could do a Huey, which lifts 3,500 pounds. I'm like, all right, you know, so I got to take the truck apart just to get it to be lifted by the Huey. So I'm like pulling the body and I have to lift that off. And I have to pull the chassis, lift that off, and then get like a bundle of like wheels and tires and brake drums or whatever the hell is the extra weight. So I get in touch with a couple companies, and finally this one guy is like kind of understanding. He's like, we've pulled Jeeps out of mountains before, like recovered these broken off-road vehicles out of canyons. He's like, this isn't our first time doing this. We have some experience. I'm like, cool. He's like, so here's the deal. He's like, if you want it lifted out, it's $18,000. I'm like, holy shit. Like, or no, sorry. He said, he said it was $12,000. I'm like, all right, so how soon? He's like, well, you're looking at like after Thanksgiving. I'm like, but I'm like here now. Yeah. I need it now, like tomorrow.
So you're making this phone call like on the side of the mountain.
I'm on the mountain. Like I had my phone wasn't working the whole time. I had one bar, and I'm like sitting there standing on top of the truck just to try to get the voice to come through, you know? And I'm like, so he's telling me 12,000 if I wait. And then I'm like, I need it tomorrow. He's like, we probably can't do that. Let me make some calls. So he calls me back. He's like, yeah, you're looking at about 21. And I'm like, holy shit. Like I can't. It's not worth it.
It doesn't make sense at that point. Yeah, the economics don't work.
So I'm like, all right, can we hit like 15, like 16, like work with me a little bit here. Like this is like I'm doing all the legwork to pull it apart and get it ready for you. It's a 1 mile as a crow flies lift. And he's kind of like playing ball, and he's like, let me call you back. He calls you back. And like, we're going back and forth like half the day. And I look at my guys, I'm like, well, no matter what, it sounds like we need to start disassembling this truck, you know? So we get our hand tools up there and we just start wrenching on the thing. But the thing with the helicopter lift is like, I was like, all right, you know, it will cost me a lot of money, but like, it'd make a heck of a good story YouTube video. It's like, if I did this would be epic to see this truck flying by a helicopter. Like, just insane thing to see on, like, you know, visually and on a screen. I'd be like, this is total wow effect, you know? And
so the helicopter's out at this point, right? You're like, all right, this is not going to work. The helicopter's out, but you have to disassemble it, right? Either way, so like, even if you do have to, worst case scenario, airlift this thing out, which you know is not really exactly realistic. You're waiting for this call back from this guy, but you're like, this, you know, the probability is really like, you know, getting lower and lower. But you're like, I gotta disassemble it anyway.
Well, like on top of that, it's like I'm sitting here, I'm like, all right, I've already got a lot of money in the trip. I'm like, you know, I could definitely float down the credit card, but I should probably pay it down a little bit this week. And I'm like, all right, you know, I can light my credit card on fire doing this airlift and like get it out of here and just worry about paying it down over the next like 6 months. I'm like, that's doable, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
But like the whole time I'm like, you know, so the other thing is it's really windy the whole time we're out there. I'm like, well, that's going to affect an airlift if you got 20, 30 mile an hour winds. And I'm like, I don't think it's going to slow down. And like, we can't wait around here forever. So the airlift is still kind of like up, and it's still a possibility. We're not fully committed to it. The guy's kind of in the works trying to give us a better quote. I'm like, either way, let's start taking it apart. So we're taking it apart, and luckily everything's coming out super easy. We twisted off one bolt on the whole truck taking it apart.
Hold on a second. This thing has been sitting on this mountain since roughly when?
Probably the early 80s, I'd say.
All right. So roughly 40 plus years. And it's an 80 plus. I mean, it's roughly 40 plus years, and it's an 80-year-old truck. And you only twisted one bolt. Everything else came off.
The best part is it wasn't even an original bolt. It was like someone's cobbled up little fix that twisted off. Like, it didn't even matter. I was like, all right, cool.
Yeah.
So other thing was the air cleaner was missing on the intake, and I could tell rodents had gone down in the intake of the engine. I was like, man, this thing's probably fried. Like, it's got mouse piss in there and like turds. It's all rusted up. And I pulled the intake off this engine just to see.
Uh-huh.
And the factory had put these gaskets on that had woven metal screens built into the gasket. So nothing passed through the gasket. And I was like, we're saved. It's good. We're good, you know? And I was like, there's probably water damage and stuck pistons, but at least the rat piss did not get in the engine, you know? I was like, thank God. So we're taking this thing apart, and, you know, we're taking it down the hill piece by piece. And so we're taking like two fenders, we're taking the radiator, the grill shell.
And using this ATV and this build your own, you know, build it Harbor Freight trailer, right?
Yeah.
Piece by piece.
So we just let Matt do the ATV work because he grew up on a farm. He drives a lot of ATVs and equipment. I was like, you just handle that. You know this machine better than any of us, you know? So he was going up and down the mountain, this thing, and just dropping the parts at the base of the driveway. So like where our truck was parked with all of our tools. So he's going down the 600-foot descent with this little trailer, dropping the stuff, coming back up. We load him up, take him back down. And so we're doing that. And then we get to like the cab. And the cab's kind of big. It's bigger than the cart. It's heavy. And I'm like, man, we don't have like, we're up in the air. It's like, we can't really carry this thing off that easy.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like looking around, there's all this like heavy brush, like thick branch brush. And I'm like, that looks like a cushion to me if I've ever seen one. So I'm like, guys, let's just tip this thing off the frame. Like, just chuck it off. Like, let it roll off the frame into the brush. And they're like, oh, well, will it hurt it? I'm like, no, it's fine. It's got some dents in the roof. I can fix that already. And I'm like, I bet you it'll just kind of gently just kind of settle down on the brush, and we can roll it down to the trail to where the ATV is. So sure enough, we chuck this thing off the frame. It somersaults down through the brush, and it comes out like unscathed, like perfect.
So do you have video of this, by the way?
Yeah.
Oh, I can't wait to see that when you post it on YouTube. That's so cool.
I gave a little snippet of it on my reel. So it's like I put it on Instagram as a reel, and you see it like rolling down the hill, and my buddy like tries to slow it down. So he grabs onto the roof and it throws him inside the cab as it's rolling. So we get the thing down there, we load it up, and then like we're taking the cab or one of the parts down the hill, and there's like this like weird area where there's a tree growing in the trail and there's a dirt bank, and the part of the body caught the tree and it somersaulted the ATV on Matt and like flipped it over on him. And luckily it didn't fully flip or go down the ravine that was right there. He just kind of like righted it up and like dusted himself off and kicked it and started it and kept going. But we heard like a commotion and like cuss words and all that. And you're like, silence. We're like,
is he still alive?
Is he all right? Like, he's like 100
alive?
feet down the hill. I'm like, we're running, and he's just like propping back. I'm like, thank God. Like, we don't have to take this guy in splints off the mountain, And so we had successfully hand carried all the pieces down there besides the chassis. And at that point, we're like, all right, well, we've already made this far.
Roll it down, right? We already tried that with the cab.
It's like, we already made this far. We got a path we like. And there's this like one area. It's so stupid. I can't believe we had to do this, but there's like, they wanted to block the user from using the trail like years ago. Mm-hmm. So they took metal conduit and they used like a post driver and they just put this metal conduit into the ground like 3 feet. I mean, we're talking like they were using this post driver so hard that the end of the pipe mushroomed over like 3 or 4 times.
Wow.
And there's like 100 of these metal pipes. So we got the ATV through them with only moving like 2 of them. Okay, no big deal. But the chassis is like, 3 feet wider than the ATV. So we're pulling out like 20 of these things, right? And the guy like didn't want him like disturbed. So we had to remove each pipe and then put them back in the same spots. And like, we're just slaving away with like high lift jacks and we're like bolting muffler clamps on the pipes to the high lift jack and like grab onto it. It's just insane. So we're like pulling these pipes out. I got one guy down there, Cord's down there, busting his balls trying to get these pipes out of the ground for the whole day. And meanwhile, we're at the top of the mountain just trying to make the chassis roll. Mm-hmm. And I could not believe it. So we're jacking up each wheel and every single brake drum turned. I couldn't believe it. Like they weren't seized up drums.
So you have, just worked. At this point, the only thing left on the mountain is the frame, the axles, and with 4 wheels on it.
Yeah. We have a rolling chassis with an engine basically sitting up there.
Okay, so the engine's still on it. So yeah, at this point, what's the game plan? Like, how do I have half the truck left? It's the hardest piece to get down.
Yeah, it's heaviest.
What's my game plan at this point? Are you thinking about the helicopter again in your head? You're like, maybe.
Yeah. I'm like, it's still windy. I was like, we could do it. I'm like, yeah, but that's not as like. At this point, we've already got halfway out. I'm not paying that much money just to get the chassis out. Like that's not at this point. We've got this far. I don't think it's worth the money just to pull the frame out of the helicopter. I think we could figure this out. And so my buddy Cord's like, dude, let's just do it. Like, screw it. I was like, you know what? You're right. If we get it halfway down the mountain, realize we can't go any farther, then we'll call the helicopter. Like we could try to get it halfway down. If we give up, we can't do it. It's not possible. Then we'll grab it, So like, all right, cool. And the biggest problem was it's steep. The dirt is super loose. Like you're walking up the trail and it's steep enough that you're losing traction with your boots because the dirt's just rolling off the hill as you're trying to walk up it. So I'm like, all right, we got dry rotted tires, 0 brakes. The only brake we have is like the factory drum parking brake on the trans for the rear axle. I'm like, well, that's just going to make the back tires skid. So how are we going to do this? And before we left for the trip, we brought with us some 22.5 semi wheels with like the right bolt pattern. Mm-hmm. So we brought 2 of those up the mountain to make the front steer. And there were still 2 tires up there that held air. So we had a roller at that point with freed brake drums. And we got the thing out of its little spot and on the trail just by hand, just pushing it and using digging bars and prying on the wheels again to turn. And the problem I was thinking of is, what are we going to use to control this thing going down this steep hill more than just like a handbrake, parking brake? Like the ATV is not going to be able to hold this heavy thing back. It weighs 4,500 pounds. And those old trucks have the brake drum backing plates have these big hex bolts that adjust the brake shoes out towards the drums so you can adjust your brakes so that, they work right. Those still all moved. So what I thought was like, well, we have the park and brake, and then I could adjust each drum just right to where the shoes are dragging on the drums and creating the resistance we need to keep it under control.
Ah, okay.
So we have it out on the trailhead, and I'm just sitting there like Mickey Mouse with wrenches, like trying to figure out what's the right amount of drag that will make this thing roll just fast enough that we can control it but not get away from us. And then at that point, then we could use the hand park and brake to slow it down more if we need to. So we start pulling that thing with like the ATV, and we found this giant piece of like irrigation PVC pipe. It was like foot diameter, inch thick black pipe for some type of water control. And we fed a chain through the center of it. So if you imagine you're pulling a vehicle, you have a chain to 2 points and you're pulling, but if the thing gets away from you, it comes up behind you and rear ends you. So we fed the chain through the pipe and kept the chain taut when we linked it together. So the pipe kept it from getting too close, and then the chain pulled it when we needed to pull on the chassis to roll it. So it was like effectively like a Johnson bar between like the ATV and the truck chassis. So we got one guy that's like on the ATV pulling me down the hill. I'm steering the truck. Matt's running the handbrake, and then Cord's running the digging bar to like help like push the wheels when they start dragging a little bit. And he has a wrench to adjust the brakes. So it's like 4 guys are just like this zoned in, just
everybody's
working together.
simultaneously like just reading each other and making it all happen, right? They know what their objective is, and they're getting it done.
Yeah, guys like, oh, the hillside's kind of like caving out over here, like turn to the right, so I'm like turn to the right, I'm like, oh shoot, cactus, turn to the left. I'm like, just trying to like navigate through this thing. And we get like all the way down, and we get through like the pipe forest, I called it. So it's like all these like steel pipes. So we're like navigating the chassis through this pipe forest and like shimmying the thing around to try to not have to remove anymore. And then there's this like giant dirt pile that was supposed to be a blockade for anybody to go up there. And so there's this giant dirt pile, and the one side leading up to it's not bad. You go over the pile, and then it's like a 9-foot drop that's like 60-degree angle, and then it like slopes out to like a road, So we have to like get this chassis like muscled up to this dirt pile, right? And we're using the ATV to like pull it. And like the guy on the ATV is scared for his life because like if the chassis gets over the hill, it's just
rolling right over him, man. Yeah.
So we just like, I was like, all right, let's lengthen the chain out like 20 feet. So the ATV guy is like, he can accelerate and get away from it in time, And we get the thing over the hill, and I pull the hand, or I'm steering it, and then Matt pulls the handbrake, and the whole thing like kicks like sideways Tokyo drift style, and the thing's sliding sideways down the hill. And I'm like counter steering, and then the ATV is like pulling to try to straighten. It was crazy. It was like out of a movie as far as like the control. Like you'd think it was like simulated.
But what's crazy is you got all this stuff. So you finally have the chassis down, the cab, all the other pieces, but you're still not all the way at like where the trailer is. So you're like what at this point, the hardest part is done, right? The most rural, the deepest part into this area is done, but you still have like these switchbacks that are about, a third of a mile, right? And another 400, 500 feet of elevation that you have to get all this stuff down, right?
So the pickup truck did all the body panels. So we blew it, loaded in the bag, took down the trailer, no big deal. And then we used that same pipe and chain setup on the chassis. So we had to like reconfigure where each vehicle was positioned, and we got the chassis in front of the truck, and Cord's truck's like a work truck. He's like, I don't care about my front bumper. Let's just get this thing out of here. So we're like chaining the pipe to the front bumper, and like it's just like mashing the thing. Like, we're like, oh my God, boy, I gotta go buy this guy a bumper now or whatever.
Yeah.
So the chassis is being held back by the truck to keep it under control going down the hill. And we're like, I'm steering it. We get around the first turn, and then there's like this hard switchback, and I make the turn, and I get about halfway oriented around it, and I'm like running off the edge because I can't get it straight. So then he's like reversing the truck through the hairpin, pulling me back, and the tires are skidding, and I'm like reversing my steering and getting situated. We get it around on 2 attempts, and then we're going all the way back down the hill. And then we're just like cruising through town on this like skateboard of a chassis with him pushing. It's hilarious. Like The locals are probably boggled to see that thing out of there because they've all been up there, you know?
Yeah. So you rescued it. It's now at this point, you have it all the way down the bottom. You got everything all the way down the bottom.
Yep.
It's all loaded up on a trailer. Where is this thing now? You brought this thing cross country back to your shop. Is it in your shop in Pennsylvania?
No. So I decided to leave it out at my friend's place in Nevada for the winter.
Okay.
Simply because I need the space inside here to finish our projects.
Makes
and I
sense.
don't want it sitting outside.
Yeah.
But we celebrated a little bit too early when we got it down because like, we're like, oh, we did it. We got all the parts, but we didn't it didn't click that we still had to load everything up on the giant trailer and it's 10 o'clock at night. And, you know, we're already exhausted. We don't feel exhausted yet, but then it started to hit us. Like we went into town, we got the celebration beers. We're like, oh, we did it. And then we're just shot. Like we were in so much pain, like to pick up a ratchet strap and try to move with our arms. Like it was just terrible. And so like we didn't even get out of there till I think it was like 12:30 in the morning when we had it all loaded up. At that point, I was like, look, this load looks hairy. We got 2 trucks on the load right now. And I'm like, we got to get over the mountains and out of the state before the DOT cops wake up in the morning and all the morning traffic hits. We got to like hightail out of here. So we drove all the way through the night, all the way back up through Vegas and got it to my buddy's place and unloaded. And then we slept all day. And that's pretty much it. I mean, it was very intense. It was every part of that trip was a little bit hairy.
That is insane. I love like the twists and turns. Like, and my favorite part is like you're in a position, you get up there and you're like, I'm between a rock and a hard place right now. I need
phone a friend.
I need to phone a friend. The person I'm going to call is a celebrity chef, right? And I guess we have to give the listeners, because if the listeners didn't listen to the first Classic 4x4 podcast episode ever, that original interview, they don't know how you and I know each other and how. So we should give a little background. So my cousin is a premier celebrity, well-known chef in New York City, right? Who years ago, he was one of the first people to commission a truck from you, right? And have you, and you built the green machine for him, which was like one of your hallmark builds. This thing is insane. It's beautiful, right? But through that process, you became friends with him. And when I was launching the podcast, I needed to call in a favor and phone a friend. And that's who I phoned. I said, Frank, dude, I know you have this relationship with Charlie, right? Like, dude, like hook me up with this guy. I'm doing this podcast. He's like, yeah, no problem, right? So that's how you and I ended up getting to know each other and then ended up becoming friends. But so you call in a celebrity chef. He goes, you know what? I know another celebrity chef that knows a whole bunch of wild people. Let me put you in touch with him. So you then get in touch with another celebrity chef, right? Who is also now an actor, right? Yeah. And then he's like, you know what? I know this like kind of wild, a little wacky, a little hairy, untethered paramilitary guy in Southern California. Let me put you in touch with him.
Yeah. That's basically it. I mean, and the thing was like the whole time I'm stepping on like all these leads. I'm like, is someone going to like send me a giant bill for their efforts? I'm like, where's this going to be like this like big smack invoice, like 30 grand for negotiations or whatever. And it's like, shoot, like I didn't want to be in it that much. It was just supposed to be a fun little extraction. And then it got like way, way blown up, but we're able to we're able to pull everything back and control it. And honestly, like every part of that extraction went so well. Like as far as like the thought process and execution was like flawless. Like there was no real hiccups in it.
The fact that nobody got killed, maimed, severely maimed or injured and no property was destroyed and this whole thing is the most amazing part to me.
And the thing was, we added up the hours and the total extraction time between the 4 of us working on it took a total of 9.5 hours to get everything out.
Wow. That is insane.
Yeah. So I guess it's like 36 man hours, but either way, it's like 4 guys, 2 half days of work and it was out. And I was like, wow, this is impressive. Like good work, everybody. That was incredible.
So that's completely wild. As we get into the end here, I guess we do know that everything's still out in Nevada. It'll eventually come back east, but what is your plan for this thing once you bring it back east and want to do the resto?
So there's a truck show in Macungie, Pennsylvania every June, which I highly encourage everybody to go to.
So we did an episode on this. I don't know if you remember. That's the antique truck. It's ATCA or
ATHS, Antique Truck Historical Society.
Yeah, or I think it's Antique Truck.
I have their magazine double clutch here right now.
Yeah, so actually I had on the podcast the gentleman who writes Double Clutch, who's actually like one of the leadership team, and he did the history of the 4x4.
Nice.
Yeah, in season 2, actually. That's another a cool episode to listen to, which is the complete history of the 4x4, which actually starts in like the 1800s. So, okay, so back to this. There's this truck show in Macungie.
I want to get the truck back here for that as it is, like intact, original as found. I want to take it up there in June and show the truck just on a trailer. Here's how we found it. At that point, I'd like to do a full nut and bolt restoration exactly how it was, paint it up exactly how it was, as delivered. Make it run, which would be the only running example that I know of. I mean, besides like the museum truck, who knows what shape that is. I want that truck to drive down the road and be tagged. Like, I want it to work. And then that'll just be part of the collection here. So I don't know how I'm going to store it. It's pretty big. Once it's done, it's going to have to be kept in a nice spot, but I don't know. We'll figure it out.
Sounds like you need a couple more buildings on the property, man.
Yeah, for sure.
Dude,
for sure.
That is completely wild, insane. Charlie, I can't thank you enough for joining us today. Like I said, and for all of our listeners out there, if you didn't listen to the first Classic 4x4 podcast ever, it's crude. That was back in the day when I was editing them myself. I didn't know what I was doing back then. You got to listen to that episode. Yeah. That's the first episode, and Charlie's on that episode. We have a fun conversation there. We talk about the Green Machine, you building the Green Machine. But I'm glad that we could revisit and talk about this like epic adventure you had to rescue this 1941 Dodge WKDA 3-ton with this rare flathead modified diesel that's absolutely insane off of a rural mountain in California. So this is, and for all of our listeners out there, again, if you don't follow Charlie on all the social channels, it's Metal by Charlie. Check out, and if you need parts, he has. If he doesn't have it, they know where to get it. Check him out online at metalbycharlie.com. And soon enough, the YouTube channel's there, Metal by Charlie. But you're going to start editing and uploading these videos. What's your timeline there for all of our listeners to watch those?
So I have another YouTube creator who helped us out on the 3-link installs we did recently, and he is putting me in touch with his editing guy. And the three of us are actually going to work together and try to get the first video out here within the next probably 3 weeks.
That's awesome.
So sometime before Christmas, we'll get that extraction video put up of the 41. And then from there, I'll start doing some more build videos and stuff like that. So
I can't wait for that video. And actually, time is going to be great because your episode is probably going to drop right about then. So our listeners are going to be able to find it like almost right when everything drops. So like the time is absolutely perfect. But Charlie, I can't thank you enough. I'm ever indebted to you for all the success we've had here at the Classic 4x4 podcast. Not only a great person, an absolutely talented builder and talented fabricator, but also somebody I get to call a friend. So Charlie, thanks for joining us today, man.
Hey, thanks so much for your efforts, Chris. I really appreciate it.
All right, rock on, brother. I always enjoy having Charlie on the show, and what absolutely epic adventure Charlie and his crew had rescuing that pre-war Dodge. But stay tuned for our next episode, which is actually going to drop right after the holidays on the second Tuesday in January, which is January 9th of 2024. This topic and episode is one of our listener favorites and top downloaded episode topics. Drum roll, please. Yes, it's going to be our 2023 truck and 4x4 market update. So we're going to change up the format a little bit this year. Not only are we going to talk about the macro economics and metrics that that are impacting and driving the classic, custom, and collector truck markets. But we're going to dig a little bit deeper into specific makes and models like Scouts, Land Cruisers, K5s, Broncos, square bodies, OBSs, CJs, SJs, Defenders. So we're going to spend most of our time talking more about specific makes and models. But from all of us here at the Classic 4x4 family, we want to wish you and your families a happy, healthy holiday, and most importantly, a happy, healthy, and prosperous 2024. Stay tuned.